helps support writers deliver their communication. So, as Sloan said, I'm the ContentOps lead for the IBM Cloud Docs at IBM. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my educational background, just to give you guys an idea of how I got into that role. I graduated from the MSTC program here at NC State in 2013. And I also have a bachelor's in Linguistics and German. I wanted to cover that because I don't necessarily, if you look at my degrees, have a technical background. And so a lot of the work that I do in my job has come from an interest in technical subjects, but without having formal development training per se. And so I joined IBM as a co-op in 2012 while I was still in the MSDC program here. I've held a couple of different job titles in my now almost 10 years at IBM. I started as an information developer, which is kind of the standard writer role at IBM, moved to a content designer role, and then content strategy and ContentOps and build lead, which is where I am. So I'm not going to make you wait too long to figure out what is ContentOps. Answering that question right away, right? ContentOps stands for Content Operations. I think we heard in the Red Hat panel earlier, if anybody had attended that, they had something called DevOps for documentation. Sounded extremely similar. So there might be a couple of terms going around in the industry for the kind of same idea of a job role. And what we do in ContentOps is design the workflows, tools, and processes that writers use to both author and publish their documentation. So that's literally what editors are using to work in the documentation, what the source format might be, how it goes from whatever that source format is to the output format, things like that, and how to do that all very efficiently and in a way that's easy to learn. So ContentOps in general is working with three kind of different facets, right? Starting with people, who is using these processes, what is their job role? Are they professional writers? Are they author managers, developers, or other roles that don't necessarily have a data background, say, or a professional writing background? What is their skill set coming into whatever the environment is for your authoring content? Technologies, so that goes to, again, like the content management system that you're using, GitHub or some more sophisticated ones for data. What tools are you using? The editor, other just general tooling questions, and then what is the source format? Is it Markdown? Is it data? Is it ASCII doc? Is it software? Red Hat? Any number of those other technological questions, and then finally the processes, right? Like how do all of those people use these technologies in a way that ends up with high quality documentation in the end? So that's what ContentOps is all about. And as we are designing, our content authoring and publishing systems, we have a certain set of goals, right? We want to make sure when you have good content publishing flow, that you are promoting consistent content. That might be through automated toolings like for quality checks, such as grammar, spelling, style, or things like that. Those might be integrated into the flow. Could be in terms of the source format, so making sure that everybody has consistent coding and it's fewer errors and whatnot. And in general, you're probably supporting a very large number of writers who are working in lots of different topics, and you want that all to come together to a cohesive, consistent output so the writers can't tell that, right? So ContentOps helps make that reality. Quality is, again, kind of in alignment with the consistency piece that I was talking about, but again, making sure that your ContentOps workflows support, have those automated checks in place so that there's less manual review needed. It's because it's consistent. There are fewer, opportunities for error to be made as writers can create their content. And again, and then finally, efficiency. They want to make sure that this is a well-oiled machine, right? You don't want to have lots of starting points where there's manual things that writers need to do to get their content published. the smoother the processes are, the more writers can focus on doing what they do best, which is writing, and not struggling with the tooling, struggling with the process, struggling with things that aren't writing, right? So the processes themselves again need to be scalable. So that means you want processes that can work with 5 teams, they can work with 50 teams. It's something that as projects come and go, you want to make sure it is flexible and can handle that kind of scope. You want them to be easy to learn and easy to use, of course, because writers come and go from different projects. One of the biggest hurdles, at IBM, we're a very large company, but and writers move on and off projects, right? They move on and off teams within the company, and something that teams will struggle with if they don't have a good ContentOps workflow in place is having to, whenever they move projects, relearn all the tooling or relearn all the processes, and they're just very different, and that means that the time to actually getting productive as a writer in that particular space is much longer than it really needs to be for everybody's using the same processes and tools. And then also making sure they're easy to troubleshoot and maintain. So we want things to go smoothly. They may or may not always, do so, and helping writers learn when things go wrong in the process, and also how to fix it when it happens is important. Okay, so I have this example workflow here. I'm not going to go into the details of the workflow itself, but it's just showing, again, the people, the technology, the processes, how things come together for us in IBM Cloud Docs. So the people in this example would be like the person who is opening up that GitHub issue, for example. They're actually doing the cloning. That's the person aspect of this flow. They're committing the changes, opening pull requests after they have done their draft and whatnot. Then you've got the technologies that we're using. That's GitHub, as you can see here. Markdown for our source format. We've got a Jenkins pipeline that runs the build automatically. We've got linters, which are like automated validation tools that check the Markdown source. We've got a YAML source as well for navigation that checks that for writers, so lets them know if they introduced any coding errors. Markdown we use for building it. So just in general, you can see how all of these technologies come together to form a full workflow. And the processes, as I said before, are going to be the glue that brings this all together, right? So they will work locally. The process might be they need to get how they get reviews. Opening a pull request, getting that review could be part of our recommended workflow here. So I wanted to go over what does that look like in the context of a technical writing team. How does the ContentOps role fit, with say the number of writers or whatnot that you might have on your team? Depending on the size of your team, it might just be a hat that somebody wears. It might be something they do part-time to manage any processes that you have in place, or to do the investigation on the tooling updates and things like that. On a larger team, you might have one or more dedicated people who have this role. So that's kind of the model that we have on our team, where I'm a dedicated ContentOps person, and I actually work in tandem with a couple of developers as well. So we kind of do a separation or specialization, I guess you could call it, of roles where I'm focused on developing the processes themselves, and in some cases doing some of the coding, coming from a writing background, just being more familiar with the authoring environment and what it is to be a writer, and the content strategy angle and how that all needs to come together in the processes that we have. The DevOps guys are there to do like the heavy hitting coding on actually getting in Jenkins word traffic for the teams that use it, the pipelines out the door. And so we've got a team of 3 to 4 people who are working on our ContentOps goals. And then finally, there might actually be a couple of layers here. So I'm in a case where I'm in a very large company, right? IBM has its own central corporate tool team, for example, and we build, so they have a team that manages all of the GitHub instances that we have, all of the Jenkins instances that we have. And so our ContentOps team doesn't have to do that. We build upon those processes. And so it can be a little bit, layered as well. Finally, well, second finally, I guess I should say, I wanted to cover what I think are the major skills and traits that you would need to have if you're interested in the content ops world. Number one would be strategic thinking. So as you can tell, this is a big system that you're designing. It's not just a technical question. It's around, what it is to offer. It's how do you help enforce content strategy through the tooling that you make available. And so you need to be able to, think broadly, right? And it's not just one tool, but how that tool fits into your own processes, the company's goals, and like that, and just think strategically across the board. Communication is, as you might imagine, very important. So for us, it's, when we roll out new features in our pipelines and other things like that, being able to communicate it to all of our stakeholders who are the writers, right? And tell them what's changing, how they can take advantage of it, what they need to know, and how, if there are any action items for them as a result of these changes, for example, and making yourself available for any questions that they might have. So we communicate through many different formats. Say we've got monthly meetings, dedicated meetings. We've got Slack channels where we talk one-on-one with writers. We have open office hours where people can just hop in and ask questions of our team. And so communication is just a huge aspect of it. Empathy, I think, is another important trait to have. You need to understand put yourself in the shoes of your users and stakeholders who are writers, right? That's one reason in our team it's incredibly important for us to have somebody from a writing background in the content ops role, because the developers have never, they don't do this on a day-to-day basis. They're not using their own tools, and so that's why we have kind of done the specialization that I was talking about earlier to, bring in somebody who knows what exactly the writers are going through, and they're going to have to, use those processes that we come up with. And another big point on empathizing is when people run into problems and we have to do all the education on these processes and stuff, just understanding where they're coming from, understanding. Sorry, I don't know if I can admit this person. Understanding what they're going through, long story short, in order to make everybody's experience better. And then finally, as you can imagine, this is kind of a technical subject. I don't do the coding on most of our pipeline stuff, but I need to have a very solid foundation on all of the tools that we use, and I do other development aspects when it comes to some of the tools that we use. So having, even if you're not a developer per se, which I'm sure most of the people on this call have a background in that area, just having some affinity for technical subjects will go a long way towards getting able to actually implement a lot of the ideas that you might have for your content development. Okay, and then here, finally, I wanted to cover, so on our team, we, again, have dedicated developers. We've got, all of these resources available in a team that's been around for nearly 10 years at this point. But you don't need to have all that infrastructure kind of in place to get started. So I wanted to cover, if you're interested in bringing a better content ops flow to your team, what you can do to get started. And so the steps that I would recommend would be to first just jot down and write out your overall writing and publishing workflow, meaning like, what is our, like, where are we starting from? What are the processes? Just getting it all down on paper. That will help in the next step here to actually look for like those friction points and look for where things can be made a little bit more efficient, either in the tooling that you use or even, again, just the processes that, so it might not be a technical question there, but how can we make this easier, make this flow into this step a little bit better? I would, of course, be remiss if I didn't mention something technical. So I mentioned here scripting something small. You don't need to necessarily have a whole, production level like Jenkins pipeline thing set up. You can just start with some small scripts. I started with just basic like bash command line scripting. So if you're like comfortable with running command line things, you can write a bash script to essentially do all that command line stuff for you and run regular basis. I don't have a ton of background myself in Python, but I know that there are a couple of really effective ContentOps teams who use Python scripting to do text transformation. And it's one of the languages that I hear recommended most frequently for ContentOps and content, again, manipulation, automation, and documenting everything that you came up with. So a large part of my role is documentation of supporting writers. Like, you know, we all know the value of documentation, right? So maybe this can go unsaid, but having it down on paper means that everybody knows how it works. Everybody knows, you know, how to work within the space, and saves everybody a lot of time when it comes to supporting it and otherwise getting everybody up to speed. You have these writers and things like that. And then knowledge sharing is, of course, incredibly important too, to, you know, spread awareness on your team of how everything works. And if you say did a full script or something, or you mapped out the processes, just making sure that everybody's aware of everything. And so with that stuff, I think I'm at my time. And so I don't know if we have time for questions, but
yeah, everybody have any questions for Carolyn?
I have a question. Was this something that you were asked to do, or did you just kind of see this gap in efficiencies and you just kind of started doing some stuff, and then other people were noticing and they were asking you to help them do stuff with them? And...
Yeah, so on our team, there was already, before I got started, there was a ContentOps team in place. And I think I got into it because I had a little bit of a technical background. So I had taken classes in programming. I had taken classes in this, but it was like Java. It's not something I use on a daily basis. So enough of a technical background, they could tell I was interested in that side of things. And so when I was brought onto the ContentOps team, then I can, you know, from there, I just bring in my background as a writer, right? Like, I think we could have, you know, why do we need to have manual checks for these errors when we can have linters do it for us, and just bringing that.
Awesome, thank you.
I was thinking about some of the challenges or problems which some need to be clear of when shifting from conventional documentation to ContentOps organization.
So moving from a conventional technical writing role to ContentOps, is that what you're asking?
For example, if there's an organization that have a conventional documentation setup, and they want to shift to the ContentOps role, what are some of the things that you need to be clear of?
So an organization that is just developing, say, like Microsoft Word or something, like has a very manual process. Oh, well, you'll need to do this mapping that I talked about at a very, you know, detailed level. The challenges that you're going to run into there are, you know, one, understanding the gaps of what you have, two, understanding the technologies and how you can, or what those gaps are, how you could solve them with technologies. Three is, I would say, probably getting your authors on board with the changes that you're making. So, you know, if they're used to working in something like, I'm just going to throw out Microsoft Word, whatever it might be, and you're moving to a different format, whether it's different markup or something like that, you know, making that change as smooth as it can be through education, demonstration, and other things so that they understand it's not as scary as it might seem. I think in terms of benefits, I'll just say, I think with a lot of this time, once it's out the door and teams can see, okay, I don't have to do all of this stuff manually anymore. We have these pipelines in place that will do it for us, and they will see the benefits of the time savings and having everything consistent, running, you know, really smoothly in the background, and so that helps kind of balance out some of those challenges and make it more worth it to move to that one. It's going to be a lot of work to get there up front, but as you can see, efficiency, scalability are kind of the words of the day with ContentOps. And so once you do that, you can